A 14-year-old girl becomes the youngest woman in America to be charged with first-degree murder after she and her adult boyfriend are accused of killing 11 people. An 18-year-old bludgeons her classmate to death and carves a pentagram into her chest, sparking fears of satanic worship. A 17-year-old crashes her car into a wall, killing her 2 passengers, which leads to one of the most talked about criminal cases of the last decade. Today, we're talking about 3 teen girls behind 3 of the most notorious murder investigations in American history. And if you haven't noticed, teenage girl killers are kind of trending right now. There was this new Netflix documentary that came out recently called The Crash, and it's the biggest true crime doc in the world right now. And it's drawing all of this attention to teenage girls in true crime. And usually they are the victims in these types of cases, but not always. It's late 1957 in Lincoln, Nebraska, and there's a 13-year-old girl, Carol Ann Fugate. Now, she's a very well-liked student, she's quite popular at school, and she lives with her mom, Evelda, and her stepdad, Marion Bartlett. She also has a half-sister, Barbara, and Barbara actually introduces Carol to this guy called Charles Starkweather. Now, Charles was 18 and Carol was 13, so obviously there's a really big age gap there, and it's obviously very concerning for us to look at this situation now. But back then, from their perspective, it was kind of like, oh my god, there's this older guy, like he's so cute. Especially because Charles, he kind of took on this like James Dean impersonation. He was clearly very heavily inspired by James Dean based on the way he was dressed, how he was acting. He was like very broody, very intense. And this was quite irresistible to younger girls in high school because they kind of all looked up at him and was like, oh my god, he's like a James Dean lookalike. And this was especially the case for Carol. But the thing is, Charles wasn't James Dean, no matter how hard he tried to look like him or act like him. Underneath all of that, he was just a very resentful and angry person. This was because Charles was bullied quite relentlessly when he was growing up, and this was specifically because he was bow-legged, which basically means his knees were curved outward, which is a very weird thing to bully someone over, but kids can be quite cruel and relentless. And he also had speech impediment issues. So he was, made fun of a lot in school and didn't really have a lot of friends. And as he grew up, it kind of just turned him into a really spiteful person. And not only that, he had an IQ of around 70. He literally dropped out of high school when he was around 16. And he was, struggling to find work. He was not financially stable whatsoever. So just a very, unstable, inconsistent person. So going back to the fact that Carol was 13 and Charles was 18 at the time that they had met and they actually got together and started, dating. This is in the 1950s, so it's possible that some people back then didn't really look at the situation and think it was that weird because it wasn't considered to be as socially, unacceptable as it is today. But what we can say for sure is that Carol's parents did not approve of their relationship, and they did pressure Carol a lot to end things with Charles, but Carol didn't want to, right? She was like, no, I'm in love, blah, blah, blah. So unfortunately, her parents couldn't really do much about the situation either. Then on December 1st, 1957, this is when Charles commits his first murder, and it's over the most petty and insane situation. He was at a gas station and he was basically trying to buy kind of like a stuffed toy for Carol as a gift. But at first he didn't have enough cash, so he tried to use credit and then that got denied. And I think because he was just so humiliated over that, he killed the gas station attendant. He shot him once in each leg and then fatally in the head. And this poor guy, he did try to fight back, with everything that he could, but it unfortunately just wasn't enough. Now, at this point, Carol and Charles had kind of been together for around a year now, and whatever was going to happen next, she was going to end up right in the middle of this crazy situation. It's now January 21st, 1958, and by now, Charles hasn't actually been linked to the murder of the gas station attendant that happened around a month prior to this. But his personal life situation has deteriorated dramatically. He lost his job as a garbage man. He was evicted from his home because he couldn't pay rent. And on that day, January 21st, Carol comes back home after school. And when she goes inside her house, she just finds Charles waiting there for her alone. And this surprised her a little bit because she was not expecting him to see there. He never told her that he was going to be there, but he just suddenly says that he has her family held hostage And if she doesn't do exactly what he says, something really terrible is going to happen to them. So, of course, she listens to him and she's like, okay, okay, like I'll do whatever you want. But little did she know, or claim to have not known, was that her family was already dead. Now, no one knows exactly what led Charles to Carol's house while she was at school. But what most sources suggest is that he went to see her parents and there was a bit of confrontation that happened between them, and it just exploded into really terrible violence. Charles shot and killed her stepfather and her mom, and the sources are a little bit mixed on this, but she had another 2-year-old half-sister, and some say that she was stabbed, but other sources say that she was beaten, strangled, suffocated, but it does appear that she died of blunt force trauma, and we know for a fact that Charles did it. Now, he didn't just like leave the bodies like in the house itself. He actually kind of scattered it around the property for some reason. For Marion, the dad, he hid his body in the outhouse, which is kind of like a shed that has a non-flushing toilet in it. And for Velda, the mother, her body was stuffed into the chicken coop. And for Betty Jean, Carol's half-sister, she was in a cardboard box. Now, for nearly 6 weeks, Carol and Charles remain inside this house. And people do come to visit, like Carol's other half-sister, Barbara, the one who literally introduced her to Charles, their grandmother, her brother-in-law, neighbors, just to come over and like say hi. But every time someone came over, Carol just dismissed them. And she just kept telling everyone that her whole family was really sick with the flu, so no one could come inside. And it didn't really seem like she, was asking for help or anything. All she really did was write a note and put it on the outside of their front door. And it said, "Stay away. Everybody is sick with the flu, Miss Bartlett." Now, most interestingly, Miss Bartlett was underlined twice, indicating that someone, a Miss Bartlett, wrote it. But Carol claims that this note was actually a cry for help because the only actual Bartlett in the house was Betty Jean, her 2-year-old sister. So if someone was able to catch on to this, they would be able to see that obviously a 2-year-old girl would not be able to write a note like this. And Miss Bartlett kind of reads as if it's in reference to her mom, but it was actually a cry for help. But unfortunately, nobody picked up on it and nobody really pushed to see the family. So by around January 27th, after nearly 2 months, it finally got to a point where Carol's grandmother was now really, really suspicious. So then she decided to contact the police. And this is when Charles knew it was time for them to both leave and go on the run. So what happens now over the next 2 days was a huge killing spree that sent the entire state of Nebraska into a widespread panic. When they leave Carol's home, they're on the run and they're essentially just trying to find the first place that they see. And it happened to be a farmhouse. And when they got there, they shot and killed the owner, August Mayer. He was a 70-year-old farmer. And then after that, they fled again. They ended up hitching a ride from 2 teenagers, Robert Jensen and Carol King, and they killed them after forcing them to drive them to a nearby abandoned shelter. And then they stuffed both of their bodies and the farmer's body into their car before they abandoned it on the side of the road or whatever, and it ended up sinking into mud. Then they fled to a wealthier part of Lincoln, which is just a different part of Nebraska, and they were now using Jensen's car, which was one of the teenage victims. And then they ended up breaking into this really, really nice house. Basically, this house that they broke into only had 2 women inside. One was the wife, Clara Ward, and a maid, Lillian Fenkel, and they killed the wife, as well as their 2 dogs. Then they forced Lillian, the maid, to make them breakfast. And then eventually, when the husband came home, Mr. Ward, they shoot him and he was killed as well. And then they ended up tying Lillian to a bed and killing her as well. Then at some point, they fled the scene. And after they had run away, the bodies of these 3 people and the 2 dogs were found in this house. And this is when police really was okay, no, now a man-scale hunt is going to take place and it's very, very serious now. They were doing house by house searches. They even called in the National Guard. The FBI was brought in. This was a huge, widespread investigation and huge manhunt for these 2 people. Now, as they were still on the run, one of their later victims was just a traveling salesman. His name was Douglas Wyoming, and they shot him to death while he was sleeping in his car. And then they stole it and drove away. Now, we kind of have the context as to what happened in these murders, but we will never know why they decided to do these things. So on January 29th, 1958, near Douglas, Wyoming, this was when a really high speed chase ensues. And at some point, Charles ends up losing control of the car that he was, driving. And, there was like gunfire and everything, just like super crazy, like something out of a movie. And at some point, he like stops the car, gets out, and just surrenders immediately. And once he does that, Carol gets out of the car and is screaming towards the officers, like, he's gonna kill me. Don't let him kill me. This situation was so crazy at the time when obviously this case was brought over to the courthouse. Huge crowds gathered outside. I'm talking like hundreds of people from all across the country. People literally travel to Nebraska just so they could be there in person to see this trial take place and just to see like how this case was going to, pan out. Within 2 hours of their arrest, there's already two different stories that are beginning to emerge. From Carol's perspective, she said that she was held hostage, that everything that happened was against her will. She was terrified and she had absolutely no choice. But Charles, he said that she was willing, that she helped throughout all of these killings. She was right there with me. Now, when Charles got arrested, he said something really disturbing. He said that if he was going to be sent to the electric chair for this, that Carol should be right on his lap when it happened, which is just, it's like so gross that in his last moments, he still wants to be close to her. And obviously, it has this really weird sexual implication. And it kind of mirrors this, act of like parents having their kid on their lap. Like that's almost like what he's implying, but in a really twisted, really disgusting, creepy way. And it got me thinking, like, what did Charles have to gain by implicating Carol, right? But he's already going to be facing execution. Like he literally has nothing to lose. So he's like, well, might as well just drag her down with me. And the thing is, his testimony against Carol is what the prosecution used as a primary weapon against Carol. And also, the spree happened over the course of like 8 days through Nebraska and Wyoming. So if she was really held captive, why didn't she ask any of the dozens of people she came across for help, right? She probably had a lot of opportunities to maybe run away or to maybe indicate something to somebody. And apparently her response to this was always the same, that Charles told her that if she tried to do anything, he would kill the remainder of her family. And we have to keep in mind, she was only 14 years old. So, she probably had a lot of PTSD, a lot of trauma, and was kind of just, following him along, really not sure what to do with herself. But she was also a willing participant. So this case just has a lot of questions surrounding it. Now, the trial took place in late 1958, and from the start, it was pretty stacked against Carol. Her lawyer did try to move the case to juvenile court because of her age, but this was 1950s America. So there was no Miranda rights yet. I mean, the police could literally isolate suspects and just interrogate you for hours on end without any lawyer present. And this is what happened to Carol, and she was only 14 years old, so she didn't know any better. She didn't have any support system. And her lawyer tried to highlight that Carol was separated from everyone that she knew. Like her whole family was dead and her other family members, wasn't there for her. So she was completely alone. But she ended up getting convicted of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. And she actually was the youngest female ever to be convicted of first-degree murder in US history at the time. Now, for Charles Starkweather, he was executed by electric chair in June of 1959, and he was 20 years old at this time. Now, for Carol, she did serve 18 years in prison, but she actually got paroled in 1976 at 31 years old. And then she got married, moved to Michigan. She actually was able to build a quiet life for herself. Then as of February 2020, at 76 years old, she did try to get a pardon from Nebraska Board, which is basically asking the government for forgiveness for committing a crime that you were convicted of, but the board denied her pardon. So she was actually never exonerated. Like even to this day, her conviction still stands. Now, at this point, obviously decades have passed, so it's hard for us to understand how fascinated people were by this case, but this was like the first major killing spree to unfold in the age of television back then. So, you know how I mentioned before that people were like gathered around the courthouse and people traveled from all over the country? I mean, not only that, people were glued to their screens witnessing this, horrific killing spree unfold in real time. But it was just so shocking because of their age as well. Like this teenage outlaw couple escaping law enforcement and killing people. It was just so extreme, but people had such a morbid curiosity about it as well. And the whole story of a 14-year-old as the right hand of a deranged gunman in 1950s America has literally inspired films, books, and honestly, decades of debate. Was she a victim, an accomplice, or something far more complicated? Well, now we're leaving 1950s Nebraska and heading south to Knoxville, Tennessee in 1994, where an 18-year-old girl named Krista Pike is about to make headlines for a very different kind of murder investigation. 1994, Knoxville, Tennessee. 18-year-old Krista Pike arrives at the Job Corps Center, and it's basically a government-funded program designed to give young people a better path forward. It's often for those who come from really difficult backgrounds, and Krista was one of those people. She had a really, really rough upbringing, and she was basically looking for a second chance, for new opportunities. Krista was born prematurely on March 10th of 1976 in Beckley, West Virginia, and her mother struggled with alcoholism really, really badly. And because of this, she was always dating a lot of different men and had a lot of men coming in and out of her life. And a lot of these men also sexually abused her. And she was very severely neglected as a child as well. So she had a really rough time growing up. And by the time she was a teenager, she spent time in juvenile detention as well. So that's a little bit about her background. And at this Job Corps Center, she ends up meeting two other people who are also going to become very central to the story. So first, she meets 17-year-old Tatterall Shipp, who's from Memphis. And yeah, that's really his name. I just never heard a name like that before. And he ends up becoming Krista's boyfriend. They're pretty much like inseparable almost immediately. They fall in love pretty hard. It's kind of like one of those, cliche like teenage relationships. But anyhow, she also meets a 19-year-old girl called Colleen Slemmer. She's a quiet student from Jacksonville, Florida. What we know about her is that she was hoping to study computer technology, which is why she was at the Jobs Corps. And she was known to be, a very kind-hearted person. She actually spent a lot of her time helping disabled children. But within 3 months of Colleen's arrival, Krista started to become convinced that she was trying to steal her boyfriend Tatterall away from her. Now, Krista and Tatterall, they were not what you would really call your average couple. They were deeply into Satanism and occult practice, and this wasn't some sort of like passing phase. Like they were deep in it. In Tatterall's room, he had a satanic Bible. He had an altar, like a homemade small shrine for the devil, for Satan, and he even called Krista his little devil, which is kind of cringe. At some point, Krista started to convince Tatterall and their other friend, Shadola Peterson, but I'm going to call her Shadoya, but it's spelled with a double A. I'm not 100% sure of the pronunciation of her name, so just bear with me, please. But anyhow, Krista told the two of them that Colleen essentially needed to be sacrificed in the name of Satan. Right. And when they first heard this, they're kind of like, yeah, like you're just messing around. It's because you don't like her and all of this. But no, she was actually dead serious. She was locked in on Colleen because she was just that deeply convinced that she was actually trying to steal Tatterall away from her. Even though many times Colleen herself has explicitly said that she has no interest in Tatterall. She does not see him that way at all. Even other people said the same thing, but Krista just didn't see it any other way. She was fully convinced that Colleen was trying to steal Tatterall away from her. But the thing is, this wasn't actually just about Tatterall. This was about Krista needing a target, and she found one. That was going to be Colleen. So on January 11th of 1995, this is when Krista told her friend that she was seriously planning to kill Colleen because she was just feeling mean that day. That's what she said. Now, her friend as well kind of dismissed this as just like talk, Krista is a little bit wild. She says things like this, but little does she realize that she was being dead serious. Because on the night of January 12th, Krista, Tatterall, and Shodoya, they approach Colleen. And they basically tell her, hey, we're going to go smoke weed in the woods by campus. Like, come with us. We can hang out. And, she's like, yeah, sure. Why not? Because they all know each other. They're in the same dorm. They're like a group of friends. So why wouldn't she say yes? So at this point, she's walking with the three of them down, the school campus. And to her, there's like absolutely nothing about the situation that is weird or, nothing is standing out to her because this was her friends. These were people that she knew. Like maybe there was a little bit of tension from Krista because of the Tatterall thing, but there was nothing that would have suggested that she was walking towards the last hour of her life. Now, what happens next is pretty disturbing, so I'm not going to linger too heavy on the details here. So viewer discretion is advised. But at some point after they walk away from campus and they kind of walk deep into a wooded area, this was when the attack began. Colleen was attacked with a knife and a box cutter, and this was done at the hands of Krista, and Tatterall also helped out. Shadoya didn't partake in any of this, but she was there as a bystander. And throughout all of this, Colleen begged them to stop. Like, she was fighting for her life, but it wasn't enough. This attack lasted for around an hour, and they were torturing her as well. At some point, Krista took her own hairband out of her hair and jammed it into Colleen's mouth in order to silence her. They carved a pentagram into her chest and one onto her forehead because they believed that this pentagram represented a trap door intended to release her soul. Because remember, they're really into this weird, crazy, like satanic stuff. And at some point, Colleen did try to run away, but Krista and Tatterall ran after her and tackled her and then continued to attack her and cut her. And then the final moment was when Krista picked up a piece of asphalt, like concrete, and just repeatedly smashed it into her head, fracturing her skull and ultimately killing her. As Colleen was just there dying on the floor, Krista reached down and took a piece of bone that came out from the side of her skull as a souvenir. Now, the next morning, her body was found pretty quickly by a groundskeeper, and at first, he thought that it was a dead animal because of just how badly her body was beaten. The arrests happened pretty quickly, and within 2 days, they are all found and apprehended on January 14th. Now, for Shadoya Peterson, like I said, she was there, but she didn't actually partake. She was just a bystander slash witness. So she ended up cooperating with the police and she became a witness for the state. So she only received probation, which I personally think is such bullshit, but whatever. As for Krista, she did give the police a full detailed confession. And throughout all of this, she didn't show a single ounce of remorse. In fact, I think she quite enjoyed it. She did not regret anything whatsoever. Now, for Tatterall, he also gave a statement, but it was kind of vague. Like, he didn't really want to fully confess and admit his role into all of this. And he was like, yeah, like, I didn't know she was planning this. Like, saying basically, like, yes, I was involved, but I didn't, like, premeditate it. And it was, like, mostly Krista. I mean, he even called himself an idiot and a child for even being a part of it in the first place. Now, the trial for this case moved really quickly. The defense did try to frame this as, you know, mental health issues, and what happened to Colleen was just a moment of psychological collapse rather than a premeditated killing. But the jury wasn't convinced, like, at all, because of just how brutal it was and the fact that she went around telling people that she wanted to do this before doing it, which shows signs of premeditation, right? So on March 4th, 1996, at 20 years old, Krista Pike was sentenced to death for a crime she committed when she was 18, and she became one of the youngest women ever sentenced to death in modern American history. As for Tatterall Shipp, her boyfriend, he was convicted of first-degree murder and received a life sentence rather than a death penalty, but he actually was paroled in October of 2025, so just last year. Now, 5 years into Krista's sentence, she proves she hasn't changed at all. On August 24th of 2001, at the Tennessee Prison for Women, there was this evacuation. And because there was so much chaos and all of these things going on, there was a dispute that broke out between two women. And Krista ended up intervening and wrapped a bootlace around one of the woman's necks, trying to strangle her to death. Now, luckily, the inmate did survive, but Krista received an additional 25-year sentence for attempted first-degree murder. And on September 30th of 2025, the Tennessee Supreme Court actually set Krista's execution date for this year, September 30th, 2026. So if this goes ahead, she will be the first woman executed in Tennessee in more than 200 years. And now we're left with a question that this case always comes back to. Was Krista born violent, or was she shaped into something violent by everything that came before? Childhood neglect, sexual abuse, a relationship built on occults and Satanism with a boyfriend who is a part of all of this as much as she was. Does any of that maybe explain what happened to Colleen Slember? Or does it just complicate a story which at its core is just about a 19-year-old girl who went on a walk with her friends and never came home? Now for our last case. It's 5:30 a.m., July 31st, 2022. Three teenagers leave their friend's graduation party and drive through the quiet suburban streets of Strongsville, Ohio. Then suddenly, as these three teens are driving home, the black Toyota Camry that they're in accelerates hard. I'm talking nearly up to 100 miles per hour in the span of less than 5 seconds. And there's no attempt at swerving, no braking, no attempt to stop at all. The car slams directly into the side of a building. And inside this car was three young people. 20-year-old Dominic Russo, 19-year-old Davian Flanagan, and 17-year-old Mackenzie Shirilla, who was the one behind the wheel. Now, Dominic and Davion were pronounced dead at the scene, but Mackenzie miraculously survived. But the more investigators looked into things, both at the crime scene and in Mackenzie and Dominic's relationship, there was a question that stuck out about the situation. Was this really a tragic accident or perhaps a calculated decision? Now, the reason they asked this question throughout the investigation after this horrible car wreck happened was because of the relationship between Mackenzie and Dominic. They started dating when Mackenzie was around 14 and Dominic was 16 years old, and the relationship was pretty intense. It was kind of like teenage love, but it moved very quickly for their age because at one point, Mackenzie was even living with Dominic and his family, and they were like together 24/7, constantly hanging out. They were basically on this really on and off relationship for around 4 years. Even though to a lot of their family and friends, they kind of came off as this really like loving couple and they were just going to get married and they loved each other so much. Their relationship was actually super, super toxic. Like they would fight all of the time. And Mackenzie was always so incredibly jealous and manipulative. Like she was just crazy. Like she threatened him on multiple occasions. There is one instance where they were having an argument and she threatened to crash the car that they were in. And so by mid 2022, Dominic wanted space from their relationship. He's kind of like, yeah, I need a break. Like I can't do this anymore. Like it's just way too much. But Mackenzie couldn't handle hearing all of this. She was a very clingy and anxious girlfriend, but she was a very manipulative person. So she was constantly trying to guilt trip Dominic into staying with her, and she just refused the breakup. Like she just didn't accept it at all. There was even a text message that was later revealed where she said, "If we can't be together, then no one can have him." So going back to the night of July 30th into the early mornings of July 31st, 2022, what really happened, right? So Mackenzie and Dominic, they were at a graduation party and quite in the early mornings, they wanted to go home. They were tired. They had been drinking all night, kind of like doing drugs. And Davion is a really close friend of theirs. They're like a really, close group of friends. They're like a trio, basically. So he asks them like, hey, can I just hitch a ride with you guys? So everything seems, relatively normal. It's like maybe 5 to 7 a.m. So it's like really early in the morning. So they all get in the car with Mackenzie behind the wheel and they start going home. Now, at some point, Mackenzie takes a turn to like a different street and is kind of now taking a really unusual path on their way back home. And unfortunately, we don't know the exact details as to what happened in this car prior to this event because the only people that know what happened, well, two of them are no longer with us and one of them is refusing to reveal anything. But what we do know based on a security camera that caught everything, a black Toyota Camry was speeding down this street at 100 miles per hour in this downtown business district. And when the car crashed, it was like this huge loud bang. It sounded like an explosion because of how loud it was. But because it happened in the early mornings, it took around 45 minutes before a passerby, found the wreck and called 911. And when first responders arrived on scene, there was body cam footage that was released, especially if, like I mentioned in the beginning, you watch the documentary, The Crash, you can see all of this unfold, where you see the officers just saying like, oh my God, because of just how absolutely wrecked this car was. Like you would look at it and say, there's no way anyone is alive in there. Like a car is like this, right? But it was like scrunched up like a ball because of just how much impact the front of the car took from smashing into the side of a building. Even though the state of the car was so severe, first responders were shocked to see that one person was alive out of the three people who were in the car. And it was the one who was behind the wheel, Mackenzie. She was breathing very, very lightly, and they could see that she was still there, unresponsive, but they bring her to the hospital immediately. And after they take her body out of the car, they notice that her fuzzy slipper was still wedged between the gas pedal and the floorboard. Now, the trial for this case took place in 2023, and despite only being 17 years old at the time of the crash, Mackenzie was tried as an adult. For the prosecution, they wanted to implicate her. They claim that she crashed this car on purpose, and this is why. First, we have 93,000 text messages showing the state of Mackenzie and Dominic's relationship, just showing how up and down it was and how toxic it was, all the arguments, because they were trying to show motive, showing that Mackenzie wanted to kill Dominic and herself in a way. It was unintentional that she survived this, but she had threatened him on multiple occasions. And not only that, there was also the car's black box, which basically holds all of the data of the car, right? And they could see that the accelerator was fully pressed, reaching 100 miles per hour in 4.5 seconds. And there was no attempt at braking, no attempt to like steer the car away or anything. It was just straight down this road, crashing into the side of the building. Now, for the defense's case, they said that there was no direct proof of intent, that this was a traumatized teenager. And they even said that several people testified that Mackenzie and Dominic's relationship was actually very loving and very healthy. But then you also have other people claiming that it wasn't, and text messages saying like completely other things. So it's kind of like a he says, she says situation. But not only that, they leaned more into this argument that Mackenzie suffered from a really bad medical condition, which caused her to get super dizzy. And that's what happened when she was driving. She basically lost consciousness and crashed the car. And she doesn't remember what happened, during that when she was driving, or what even happened like soon after that. Throughout all of this, Mackenzie maintains that she blacked out while driving and she doesn't remember anything. But most telling was that she didn't want to testify during trial. But the thing is, the judge wasn't having any of this. The judge said, this was not reckless driving. This was murder. She had a mission and she executed it with precision. So on August 14th, 2023, Mackenzie Shirilla was found guilty on all 12 counts, including murder, felonious assault, and aggravated vehicular homicide. She bawled her eyes out in court when the verdict was read, and she ended up getting sentenced to 15 years to life. Now, for Dominic's family, they believe justice was served. His little sister called Mackenzie rotten to the core and that she deserved all of this. But for Mackenzie's family, they maintain that intent was never proven, that this was a medical emergency, not a premeditated murder plot. And recently this year, like I mentioned at the beginning, the documentary that was released on Netflix called The Crash became the #1 movie on the platform. Now, Mackenzie's time in prison has revealed a lot about how she's handling it, because in September of 2025, she was doing a video visit call. I guess like if you want to talk to people, you can only do it by video calling. And she exposed her breast during this call while the person on the other end had a sex toy in their hand and they were completely naked, indicating that they were, yeah. And she did end up pleading guilty to this, and she received 60-day video visitation restriction. But that's not it. There's other things that she's done in prison that is just so odd and really shows the kind of person that she's always been. She's violated the dress code multiple times where she kind of, reveals her chest a little bit more, and she's just wearing it in a really inappropriate way. And she's purposely trying to expose herself to the staff in a really offensive sexual way. And it seemed like a lot of other inmates don't like Mackenzie at all. She's always trying to put on makeup. She has a lot of contraband in her cell. She's just like a complete troublemaker in prison. And to this day, she's still there. Her first parole hearing is expected to be in September of 2037. So that's 3 cases, 3 young women, 3 completely different levels of certainty. We have Carol Ann Fugate. The question in regards to her is murky, and it has been for 70 years. As for Krista Pike, it's not murky at all. There's no ambiguity for that case. And Mackenzie Shirilla, maybe somewhere in between, where the only person who could tell us the truth has every reason not to. You have some people out there fully convinced that Mackenzie did pass out behind the wheel and that she was unconscious and doesn't remember anything, like a lot of people in her close personal life that care for her. But then you have like the bigger group of people who say, like, no, this was clear as day. Like, she was trying to intentionally kill Dominic and Davion. And it was just by some crazy luck that she ended up surviving. Now, I don't normally do videos like this covering multiple cases in one go, but I really enjoyed doing it. I liked researching for this one and preparing it for you guys. So if you enjoyed this format, just let me know and we can potentially make more videos like this in the future. But if you haven't liked or subscribed already, make sure you do that. And I'll see you guys in the next one.